So thank you very much. It's great to be here to see about half the foreign community still left from the lockdown. Unlike IKEA, it won't be that long of a run. Should we get a red card notice to the front door, please, on an orderly way. So my name is Rich Brubaker. I've been here too long. I'm past 20 years now as of this year. And yeah, I've worked on a lot of issues of sustainability. I only have 15 minutes. So I'm going to speed through this pretty quick. But basically, when we used to be able to in these aluminum tubes and fly around and do things outside this country, I used to fly around and help a lot of companies on the ground implement, kind of develop and deploy sustainability. It's kind of what I focused on. And I've been here for 20 years doing it in China. Start off really in the financial sector, helping to sell real estate and figure out master plans for cities and valuing assets, and moved into CSR sustainability over the years. Much longer story when I have 21 hours of time. And the reason why I do it is basically because, one, the city is amazing, and two, it faces real challenges. Like, we're not chasing intangible anything here. There's no 25 years from now. It is really, it's happening here in front of us at hyperspeed. And that's both good and bad, because you get to see what's happening and you get to come together and fix it without, much discussion. Everyone comes together and gets to work on it. And then more importantly, because this isn't just going to stop here. This usually animates, I didn't bother with it, but basically we're going to go from about 55, 60% urban to 70% urban, from 7 billion to 10 billion people. We're going to have a lot more people in cities, and for me, cities is where it all starts and where we need to be focused on when it comes to sustainability. Now, let's forget all about the Sustainability 101, because ESG is hot right now, and I got to tell you, having been here for a long time working on this, what was funny is when I came out of quarantine in 20, the only thing people wanted to talk about was ESG. And there was kind of two questions. One is, what is ESG? And two, can I be ESG tomorrow? And I'm like, you're a large real estate firm with 20,000 units. Do you have any data that's centralized? No? Okay, might need a week. Wouldn't get a lot of phone calls back on that, because they realize it's a real process. And it should be no surprise that globally we're seeing ESG trending up on Google, because everyone's trying to figure out, what does it mean and what do I need to do? Because it's moved from a very niche space, financial sector, into people putting labels on everything that they are ESG. And sorry, sir. So basically, what's interesting about this is, and I'll just preface my talk by saying, I view ESG as being a very powerful tool. I view it as having potentially an amazing amount of strategic value to the right people. And this is where I think there was a question about greenwashing, and I'll address that later, is this scorecard for me is a telescope into the future where we're going and where you'll be and where you need to either get some work done or where there's opportunities for you to deploy a solution. And so for me, while I'm seeing, the chart actually goes up to here, this is kind of confusing a lot of people right now, and I think that's where we are. So just in general, I'll talk about China, and I'll talk about some of the challenges of ESG kind of on the second half of this. So in China, what we're seeing is there's a huge amount of growth and interest when it comes to ESG, but there's a ton of confusion. No surprise. I mean, one, CSR, sustainability, these concepts, these business frameworks are relatively new here, and they're also largely driven by Western definitions, Western standards, and from global headquarters telling local what to do. Second is leading firms are exposed really to international stock markets and are preparing that work to basically try and get all the information from China out. So it wasn't necessarily something that was useful here, although it's becoming more useful, but for many firms it was really like, take the data, report it out, and just getting that data was a big problem. Third thing is the EU is really pressing this. Everyone I talk to, from the international standpoint, it's always the EU. That's their main stakeholder they're looking at. And the CBOM is one of the big things that's coming up, which I'll talk about in a second, that's going to drive this as well. And there's a ton of service providers, which I'll also talk about. So the three drivers here locally, one, the man, he really, 20, 30, 60, all these standards and all these improvements and all these clarifications of what they view as sustainability going forward has helped this. It's helped a lot of people get their heads around where they need to focus: energy, water, soil, food, whatever. It also is starting to coalesce around how you create standards. What standard will you be held to as a state-owned enterprise, a private company, a foreign company, and then who those governing bodies will be. Great. Okay, so there's some clarity there. Second hand, you have a lot of money that's interested in this, and that's where I view ESG as being very potentially powerful and potentially more powerful than regulation because there's one, money involved, and two, because borders are no longer an issue. It doesn't take the US and the EU to come together and sign contracts and agree to whatever. This is BlackRock saying, I don't care where you're on the world, if you are X, we're not going to fund you. And your cost of capital is going to go up. Potentially. I'm not saying it's happening, but potentially that's what could happen from this. And that's what I'm saying, it's very strategic. There's a lot of power because if you want to borrow money, if you want to get invested in this economy, you really need to be doing a lot more than just blowing smoke up into the air. And then the last one I think that is relevant to China is the C-bomb that might come out. I think got delayed again. But the idea is that if you produce something in China, they will audit that value chain, they'll assess the carbon, and then they will go, there's a delta between what it would be in the EU versus what it's here. Here's your tax bill, please pay up. And what that can do, what that might do, again, because everything's kind of potential, the cost of production in China, the externality around the environment, social, and governance, that might be taxed in a way that creates equivalency between the two regions. And then the US will just reap the benefits because all the suppliers for Apple are the same ones for everyone else. And so if you're exporting Apple products to the EU market, Foxconn's just going to do the whole thing back to the US as well. So again, all these things coming together, these are three primary drivers for why ESG is hot, and I think why people are trying to figure out what to do, because it's a scorecard, but it's also a system, and you also have to take action. Three primary consumer segments for this. One is the global firms. I think they're the ones who are the most exposed to this. A couple ways. One is that they have to report overseas. And so they have to be more transparent. And they can be audited, right? And then also the consumers and the stakeholders have growing expectations and are looking at this in the EU, in the US, much more carefully. Now for them, the challenge is how do you get all the information in China, bring it together, and report it out in a way that kind of aligns to the US, to the EU, wherever you are. And that means that it's globally strategy, but it's locally managed. Hopefully it's globally funded, but you need a local team. So there's a lot of alignment happening there. And I was working with a retailer, and they don't have anyone here, but I was working with a real estate firm in Hong Kong, and they had 9 people just writing reports. So it's really kind of wonky on what people are doing, but the leaders are investing into these teams to figure out who they need to report to, what they need to say, and then task people to it. Then you have the China global national brands, and they are driven by listing overseas primarily, but more and more when I've talked to some of the leading kind of electronics firms or auto firms, they really view not ESG itself, but carbon or something, environmental social governance, as a way to separate themselves locally, but then also compete globally. And they're starting to see that because they didn't really pay attention to those issues historically overseas, that's why they're being limited overseas. So we can use this as a way to fix some of these issues and really become global firms. So if you talk to Lenovo, you talk to Huawei, you talk to Geely, they really see this as a lens for what they can do to be global brands and understand the expectations of what a global brand should be, just like Apple. The other thing is that they are trailing right off the back end of these global firms. So Apple invests a ton into Foxconn. Foxconn puts in all the systems. Well, all the Chinese users of that Foxconn facility can just draft off of that as well. So they're trying to figure out what's happening, how much it'll cost, what they need to do, and then they're trying to figure out how to report all their success. And then the last one is going to be the national brands, which are listing locally. Shenzhen Exchange, Shanghai Exchange just elevated their standards, just released new standards. And this is basically saying, okay, you need to, no pictures, it'll be available later. But so you can basically look at global stock exchange, overseas, US, Hong Kong, and then Shanghai, Shenzhen, different standards for reporting, but different groups of people. This group of people here is the most interesting for me right now because while there appears to be a lot happening, particularly in the SOE sector with NRDC's new regulations coming out, no one really cares. No one thinks anyone's going to care, but they're still spending the money to do the work. And they will spend a certain package and get the PR package added on. They will work with PwC to get the full certification, right, as a Chinese brand. And they're obviously working with all the large players. The other thing that's happening is from a technology and data perspective, they're putting in big systems backed off of, say, their ERP and SAP system with plugins. They're doing very minimal. Excel, fax machine, text message, whatever it takes. And they're somewhere in between. I know some that are working with PwC to get it done, but a lot of them are working with some of the suppliers, which I'll show you. So short-term impact, there is just going to be an increased need for carbon accounting, just across the board. That seems to be the one thing that people are really focused on. Social tends to be a little bit challenging, and governance is something that, well, with the US and China coming together on audits, will probably improve. ESG frameworks have yet to really be standardized. This is a problem. I can talk about that later. But carbon accounting will be standardized by the EU, by China, by US, by governing bodies at some point. So again, that's why they're kind of focusing on that. The rest of it will kind of work with, because there's too many bodies involved. And then ESG, carbon accounting, will be forced through supply chains. And again, if you're a foreign company here, this is the one thing that you're looking at is tier 1 suppliers. God, I might know 10% of them, depending upon, like if you're Target or Walmart. Tier 2, tier 3. I know some other retailers which know everyone really closely. This is the big question mark for a lot of the foreign firms. But for the Chinese firms, it goes the other way. What do I need to do? Who do I need to give it to? Oh, we're not that big. Does it really matter? Like, there's all that happening in the background. And somewhere in here is China saying, we don't want to be totally exposed to the global standards. We want to find our way too. And so you have a lot of back and forth that way. Speaking of carbon consultancies, there are a ton of them. You have the big ones. And it goes everything from the accounting firms who are pivoting because their audit business sucks into ESG and they can just apply it, into the really technical ones like ERM, UL. They get in there because they have the equipment, they have the engineering background. They're creating their own software platforms as well. And then you have some Chinese brands like Xintao that are actually starting to develop their own as the local version of. And then you have everybody else. Nobody in here has more than 10 people on staff, but they're all building faster, all building unique software, they're all building their own approach. Some are playing for the foreign market, some are playing for the local market, some are playing for the global market. There's a lot happening. Hong Kong seems to have the stronger teams right now. Maybe that's because more real estate involved, finances involved, they're closer to the money. But there's kind of two groups here. One measures the supply chain, the value chain, the building operations, and the other one manages the funds. So they're selling to the banks the portfolio approach that we'll take in the MSCI, Sustainalytics, all these different things. We'll take in their documents, we'll scrape their website, we'll create a dashboard for you that tells you green light, red light, that's it. And so you have different approaches. And there's some great people working on this, but we're still very early days. There's risks, and this whole thing could die. One of the big things that I kind of come back down to, if I'm seeing hesitancy, is that there's a lot of standards and they're not clear. And that's measurement standards. Chinese brands and foreign brands are seeing the exact same thing. And if they're poorly audited and it becomes meaningless, this whole thing is going to fall apart. Now, I'm not saying that it is poorly audited. I'm not saying that it is meaningless. But if you see the pushback that we're seeing now growing, it could become that way, especially if the foreign investors kind of give up on this. I don't think the Chinese government will give up on the standard idea that we need to regulate, improve, measure, and incentivize better standards and better practice. But I do question if there's a global recession in the next 12 to 18 months, like my Twitter feed says there's going to be, you might see BlackRock pull back. You might see governments pull back. You might see that happen. And then this becomes part of the problem. The second thing is I really view that there's too many bankers, accountants, and lawyers involved. They don't know shit about sustainability. They know about measuring things and governance. They know these structures, but they don't understand how to take that structure and really reflect the context, the progress, the process, understand the real problems, and then assign a number to it. There's not enough people from the background of sustainability in this space. They're not leading it. It's the bankers and lawyers. And so, yeah, of course there's questions about, is it greenwashing? Because it's not the brands trying to show that they're better. It's the lawyers and the bankers saying, you are better, but we don't know what better is. And so you have all these financial people involved, like MSCI, and there's great people, again, but they just have so many different ways of measuring, and they take a very financial approach to it. I'll show you an example in a minute. And then brands and marketers are starting to abuse this term. I mean, that's their job, right? Pick up any trend and run with it. If you get a little green check mark or a green symbol, it helps. And what I've found is not too much is that you're now starting to see firms trying to figure out how can they brand leverage ESG in a market like China, because they need a differentiator to sell more cars, shoes, electronics, buildings, whatever. There's specific standards around, say, fair trade or LEED that are all very valuable. But when you start to say, well, those aren't valuable enough, we should be an ESG standard, well, now you're diminishing both. And I think that becomes a risk as well. Now, I'm not saying that any of these will happen, but again, these are the risks that I've seen through the research I've been doing, through the people I'm talking to, my clients, both active and potential. This is what they come back to, because like one of them, they had probably 10 rating agencies that would scrape their data once a year off of a website, totally imperfect, and they had to literally go and chase these people to update it to reflect actual data. And most of these platforms are just like, nah, they don't really care. They're not actively trying to promote the best information. They're just like, well, just send it to us and we'll update it for next year. You're in the financial market. This is money. This affects my CAPM. This affects who invests in me. I can lose green financing if you don't update this. And that's part of the problem now. And then priorities are changing. I think COVID and the economic crisis, it's putting things on hold. I had tons of strategy work up until 18 months ago. Now everyone wants tactical. I want to fix that light bulb. I want to stay out of social media. I want to fix this problem. And that's it. Because there's so much coming at them. And at the same time, they have very clear standards coming from different governments now. So it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. But people aren't trying to think like, how do I holistically do this? Except for a handful of companies, which I'm always trying to work with. Yes, your portfolio could have greenwashing. I will address this really quick because I've been pretty vocal about this. Like I do think that there are problems with ESG, but it's not necessarily ESG's problem. So you got Elon Musk saying it's total crap. You have Rick DeSantis saying the state of Florida should not invest in ESG. I don't care what he has to say. You got Charles Munger saying that climate change is kind of whatever, it might happen, and oil is good. And then you have this banker who I'm sure you all know and love from HSBC, who gave the most epic keynote where he destroyed his career. But it was the most honest keynote, because if you watch it, and it's 17 minutes long, I was going to show that instead of me talking, actually. It's a great insight into how the financial world views this. And the reality is, he's not wrong about the basic complaints he has. He's wrong in how he framed it and how insensitive he was to the actual issues. But again, he's a banker, not in sustainability, even though he's got a responsible investor title. So when I look at, is ESG broken? One is, I try to figure out who is saying that it's broken. Well, first off, it's all old white guys. So I don't really need to listen to them or to myself, because they're defending their models. Elon Musk got delisted from ESG standards. He's defending himself. Charlie Munger is saying Sinopec is a great investment. Occidental is a great investment. He's defending his model. And they're not looking into the future. His state is literally sinking. He literally had a building fall over because of all the problems that we talk about when it comes to climate change and rising seas. But we can't invest in it because that's woke finance. Now, as someone who used to spend time in finance, you want all the best information to know whether or not your investment's going to make it, and if they're going to make a lot of money for you. So it's kind of counterintuitive. So again, who is saying it's broken is important. What are the issues they have? They never talk about the framework itself. They never talk about the system itself. They never talk about a problem. They talk about ESG as being woke, and it's always hyperbolic. So again, if they can tell me that the MSCI scorecard is inaccurately reflecting X, Y, or Z, if they can get into the details, then I will give them more attention, more time. versus someone who's just angry that it didn't work for them, that their financial model, that their business is not being accurately reflected for the future concerns that we share. Why are they saying this now? Because they're losing. I mean, he's probably not losing. But these guys, they're losing steam, they're losing credibility, they're losing their business model, they're acting out of fear. But if there's people who are saying it because they're in the system, they come from sustainability, they come from the world, and they're saying, these are the problems that we have, then again, give them more credibility, listen to them, and start to make adjustments, because there are problems. There are too many people that are not the right people in the space, creating frameworks that don't really necessarily apply. But if they're just saying ESG is woke, that's not someone you need to listen to. And then the last thing is, do they matter? I honestly don't think that Elon Musk's opinion or Charlie Munger's opinion on ESG matters. His opinion used to matter, now it doesn't. And I think that's great. I think that we should be getting hammered because it will allow us to fix the problems that we face. So for me, it's kind of like, who is saying it? Why are they saying it? And then, do we need to listen to them? I don't think we need to, by and large. So to fix ESG, first off, we need to recognize that ESG is not going to fix anything. For me, it's a scorecard. At best, it's a telescope into kind of the future, where you are and where you're going to land, and what are the issues that you're facing, what are the opportunities that you have, and then you get to work from there. But it's not the actual hammer, right? So one, I think we need to recognize that ESG is not a solution to climate change or to whatever, but it will allow you, if you're running a business in real estate or retail or auto, to understand, like, I shouldn't plant my thing here, like in Chongqing, because there'll be no water and energy, or in Florida because rising sea, or because of farmland in someplace that has no water anymore. Like, this will help you make better decisions. It's one tool. We need to accept that as well. It's not the only tool. It's not the one tool that we need to be highlighting so much on, focusing so much. There's so many other things happening. It's one tool, and it usually has a very specific purpose from the financial sector. But if you're the leader of a company, you are a government official, and you're trying to look holistically to figure out where things are, it's a great tool for that. Strategic value will be realized by a few. There will be companies like Apple, or I don't know, Porsche, or Shuion, or like whatever brand you think is a leader. They will take that thing and look at their business through that lens and go, we have work to do. They won't try and just put a stamp on it and say, we're done. It's a measure of progress and a measure of potential progress over time. And I think, honestly, very few will use that. They will use their PR firms and accountants and lawyers and things to make sure they're above standard. But then there's those groups that will just go way beyond, who are already signaling that's what they're trying to do, and here's the work that we're doing. That's how they report it. And I think you got to remove the bankers from this. I know it's their tool, but I think you need to remove them as the stakeholder that is of critical importance. Yes, they view this as a financial tool, but the challenges around greenwashing have nothing to do with them. They're using the tool exactly as it was designed for them. But the greenwashing and the functional kind of strategic value, if you're the leader looking at this for your own company, you need to remove them from it. And you need to focus on yourself, your business, the process you have, the people you sell to, the people you employ. They are the key stakeholders. But the bankers are kind of there to just say, like, this is a scorecard you can use. But it's one scorecard. And I think that the more ESG is hammered, the stronger we get. This is very early days, people. I mean, it's only a few years old that we've even been talking about this at the global level, and it's less than a year that I'd say that we've been practically talking about it here. So yeah, it's not perfect. It's not going to be. So again, if Elon Musk is tweeting about it, if he has something that doesn't make any sense, then don't worry about it. I mean, it's a process. And the people screaming are the ones the earliest being affected, because they themselves said that they were leaders of something. And the scorecard said, well, actually, you have work to do. And they just went, oh, you're just woke. And they walked away. And I think for us as potentially, I mean, I don't know how many of you are in ESG or looking at this, but that's the opportunity to maybe refine things, learn how to engage, improve the scorecards, work on, get back to work. Because I don't think ESG is going to die. I do think it'll be a valuable tool for a lot of firms. I think it'll be a base standard for a lot of others who really don't care, but I don't care about that because they'll still be held to that standard. There'll still be, if you want money on Hong Kong or Shenzhen or Shanghai, you'll have to comply with these regulations coming in. For others, they'll go, here's how we lead the future. Here's how we fix the future. Here's how we do better. And that's where I view the value of ESG ultimately for me. But then again, I'm not looking for money. So I think I did that in 15 minutes. It might have been 20. I will take questions at this point. If you want to follow me, the work that we do, I will make only one plug, and that is starting next month, I'm launching a new podcast on sustainable ambassadors. The first one is the former president of Costa Rica, but I have some amazing people on here talking about the work that they're doing and what they're seeing. It's a global thing. It's not just China. And I'm really trying to figure out like the people behind the work, what they're doing, how they're trying to move things forward. And I've got everything from textile to food to investment to LGBTQ, former head of innovation for Levi's, like just some great people I've been reaching out to, including David Nye, who I'll be recording this afternoon, to try and tell the story. Because there's a lot of work being done, but we're always talking about like the outcome and the certification and the failures. We're not talking about the people in the work and the process. And so I will be posting that on this. So if you want to follow, great. Otherwise, there's AmCham events I run all the time. Have 2 of those a month. And then I'm done. Thank you very much.